So this is something I wanted to talk about really quickly. I was watching Philip DeFranco. He was talking about the race and/or ethnicity-based medical treatment, right? Well, not him, but touching on it. He was talking a little bit about it, but I'm like, yeah, honestly, we shouldn't be doing anything that genetically makes no fucking sense at all for it to be different. I mean, if we're talking about our skin and there's something that affected, that, and however that works for the melanin production and more, that would be affected by that, then okay, sure. Same thing for hair, more curly, denser, all that. And like it would make sense then, right? Okay, yeah, no, sure. Same thing for like apparently with white people. Complexion here. I am one. We apparently process alcohol better or something. There's something going on in our liver that makes it, less, I guess, as shit-tastic to our bodies somehow. I don't really know what that is, other than like apparently, it's a thing, right? And so like if that would be something that, you had to take a medication that would affect you somehow in that liver pathway that you have going on, then yeah, no, you should take that into account. The other side of it for me, of course, became, well, we know the majority of people that are around now can and had their ancestor and ancestry, I guess, traced back to the original people that were brought over on those boats, right? And if there's any genetic disorder, predisposition, and more like that happen to continue through the generations, can be traced back to that, okay, then that would make sense, right? To like the factor in, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same thing for someone overseas if they don't have that ancestry. But, for what it's worth, here at the very least, it does, and you should factor that in, right? Same thing for environmental, nutrition, stressors, stuff like this in terms of your life, mental, emotional, societal, cultural, so on. All of that plays a huge role, like trauma and stress plays a huge role on how our bodies ultimately function. And it's massive, actually, especially over time. And that should be factored in for what it's worth. And you would say, oh, yeah, no, we do. We don't. Like we don't even do it for right people. Like, right? We really don't. So, the effectiveness of medication, what we're trying to talk about here, right? And that should be a thing, except it's not really often factored in. Like mental does create a physical effect, physical here, effect that does ultimately change and alter its effectiveness. That's just what that is. Right? And so, like, there's not much, unless it's very specific things, that any kind of genetic would affect. It's the same kind of thing for, like, a woman versus a man here. It often doesn't mean much of anything, but when it does, you should, for sure, put it in. Right? Like, hey, I've got this, massive cholesterol issue. I'm a woman. Apparently, that can happen as a result of if you're on, like, a birth control. Like that could be a factor right there, right? So it's a hard one, right? Because like often, doctors aren't going to give it much of a shit sometimes, and it's just not seen as significant, right? When it is, it obviously plays a role, and we know that, right? But same thing for studies. So if it's like 10 people that are African American, one of them happens to have a certain type of genetic predisposition that happens to specifically mean something for whatever that drug test is, then of course that's not really great, because it's just not a significant enough factor in the statistical analysis of how effective a drug might be, which goes hand in hand for why it is we have problems being able to prescribe properly to patients, or at least I'm not one. I should say doctors have been saying they have problems prescribing. The royal we is kind of like the general socialist concept. Like we're all kind of trying our damnedest here to fucking get that shit done. Well, obviously we aren't. So, it's like, it would be nice if we could do this though. Yeah, but you know, they're not. So there's that. It'd be fucking amazing. One day we'll get there. One day. But that being said, it's also super, super expensive, and it takes a really long time to really know. Right. So, and then there's fewer, unfortunately speaking, African American patients that are represented in those studies. So that ends the fucking suck. And that same thing with mixed race, right, or mixed ethnicity, right? Which is its own thing, because like if you know anything about dogs, which we're not the same as dogs, so right off the bat, but it's just an analogy to help us understand something. Okay, so it's like dogs, we know mutts live better. We know that more often than not, that their genetics work together to make something better that lives more healthily and for longer. That's a fact, right? So it's like we're the same. Humans have been shown to be the same. If we have a genetic mixture, we're better. That's how that works. Now, I'd have to get into a much deeper fucking video for that, but effectively, like, apparently the egg cell from whatever they want to call themselves, but that side, right, happens to choose what they go with. And I'm like, it's not really choose, but it's a genetic thing that seems to mean that they'll have a better shot more than anything. You know what I mean? They are the ones that, it doesn't matter if they were faster. It matters that they were the right ones, and that's the one that got in. That's how that works. But like, that's genetic stuff. So like, that's a talking between. Like, we have this genetic thing. There's this one. This one seems to fit pretty well. And after this amount of ding, 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 fine, I'll finally choose fucking the best I could get in the area. Not necessarily the outright best, just that it was like for that time, and it's about the best they could do. That's what that is. So, generally speaking, that's kind of us in a nutshell, genetically. And I have to agree with them, and I also have to be, it's more complicated than this. It's not even a thing. it's a little bit more complicated. It's a little tiny bit of a thing-ish. Depends very heavily on what we're talking about. For your skin, your hair, there's like a couple other things. But more often than not, it's more about like, hey, if you had a higher genetic predisposition for height, like your height is more important in all ways than, your skin color, for quite a few different things that you might be trying to get treated for what it's worth. Now, granted, that's more often than not aesthetic stuff, right? But like, it can be something, right? Same thing for like more muscle mass, the retention, right? So it's a thing. Like, you have to factor in some more things more often, but we don't do that. That equation's never really there, and it should be there. Same thing for like, environmental factors, societal, social factors that tend to coincide with greater risks than otherwise, because like treatment and the ability to continue treatment, the ability to continue good nutrition, the ability to so on, all of that plays a huge role in how effective treatment can be for you and for anyone, really. But when you factor in that, then it starts becoming far more individualistic. Individualistic is because that individual person happens to have whatever mixture that is, that along with their current goings on in their environment and more, means that they should have this medication and treatment type and plan that fits them best and will help them the most. Otherwise, it's essentially like fucking a crapshoot to a lot of degrees, especially now that we know about like how much our gut or gut microbiome here actually does affect that, along with like our local environment microbiome, let alone more that you might be exposed to. Like, people that are exposed to more microbiome from extraneous sources tend to seem to have a better microbiome, so long as there's not a prevailing really bad one that seems to be getting helped to continue to proliferate. So regular cleaning, right? But hey, they're exposed more often, and so they're more diverse, and so they're stronger at invaders coming in, generally speaking, right? And so like that's typically how that works. But that also means it's like different medications might massively, significantly affect that, uh, or not at all in any goddamn way. It's so fucking abhorrently shitty knowing about the fact that we don't like factor a lot of that into most of our studies anymore. Well, ever really is a better way to put it. You know, like we did try our best for some of them back in the day, and this is very recent for what it's worth. But like, it's super, super expensive and super hard to do. And like, you have to test all of those things. You have to have an extensive patient history. You have to like get people that are willing to, you know, get tested for those drugs, and that for that long period of time, if they have an ancestral predisposition thing, like that's very, very necessary, and you might not even have that person. You know, like, and they can be within a majority to a very small minority. You know, if you're in a rural place where it seems to have a pretty consistent, like, then it's like more likely than, you know, a bigger city. Like, oh well, you know, but then you have more environmentalized, the whole thing. It gets really rough actually to factor any of that in. So unfortunately, the answer is it's complicated. They were correct what they were saying with, but they were also incorrect. Which is why it's like it matters a tiny. Well, actually, depending on what is going on here, it matters a massive amount, or it matters very little. It matters extraordinarily dependent heavily on what this is that's going on. Like, and that's what that is. Yeah. So, you know, I love it though, because it's like we need to get rid of that. Like the way that they do that currently is really piss poor. That's what that is. But otherwise, it's like we actually do need to put that in there, depending on what it is we're talking about. It's a huge, huge deal. So, that's the next step, though. You know, you got to start somewhere. So it's better to at least like not have that be something that's like, no, it's not even a big deal. It's like, no. No, this is actually showing that they're definitely having the same amount of issue that you are, which is what we often also say about women, which is shocker, you know, shock horror things, right? Like you would be a collapse on the ground. Okay. You know, if you had this type of, it's like, that's not how that works. No. That's the amount of times I see that get discounted too, when I've heard that from either friends or family, for what it's worth. It's just terrifying. That being said, it's still like I also get discounted, but then I have mental disabilities and you know, other issues as well, which apparently lend themselves to just, no, it's not even a thing. It's just in your head. You know, like, very fucking stupid. It's sort of a problem. You know, and that's the gist of it, right? Because it's like in a way, like I agree with them. In a way, I actually can't totally fully agree with them, because it does matter a little. It does depend very heavily on that, and then it matters a lot, right? Like depending on that medication here, that could be a massive to it means literally nothing. Like you'd be talking about other environmental factors well before that. So there you go. Suck my dick and balls, because this is the tagline on the way out. This is my actual phrase. Like and subscribe, comment, all that stuff. See ya.